the user-generated content over to Netflix and see if this works. If you have stuff like what Mr. Beast does, if you could put that on Netflix, would that bring in a new subscriber base, or would that open, the content to? Because
Uncle Kevin's got the mic. We're diving deep. Business, film, and culture, secrets to keep. Pull up a chair, it's a ride, not a chore. Conversations with Uncle Kevin, big ideas we're always revving. Talking shop and spilling gold, stories fresh, never old.
So it was just announced that some Spotify podcasts will be going to Netflix. Netflix will start offering sports, culture, lifestyle, and true crime podcasts that Spotify Studios and The Ringer produces. Netflix sees the podcast complementary to its current offerings. The Ringer F1 show, for instance, will sit neatly alongside Drive to Survive. Of course, for Spotify, this is a way to get more eyeballs and eardrums on its original programming. With TV viewing becoming a bigger priority for YouTube over the last few years, this seems like a way for Netflix to bite back in the battle for consumer attention, given the prevalence of video podcasts on Google platform. Many people use streaming services for background comfort, sound, and turning to podcasts to talk radio style formats. Something Disney Plus also offers with the Rich Eisen show on weekdays may be a way for them to do that after pulling the plug on cable and TV. Spotify also recently inked a ChatGPT deal that allows users to receive personalized music and podcast recommendation after starting a conversation in ChatGPT. This partnership marks a new chapter for podcasting, said Roman something, VP head of podcasts at Spotify. Together with Netflix, we're expanding, discovering, helping creators reach new audiences and giving fans around the world the chance to experience the stories they love and uncover favorites they never expected. This offers more choice to creators and unlocks a completely new distribution opportunity. So looking at it from this headline, for me, like the first thing that I tend to see with business is where there's smoke, there's fire. And I believe this is the beginning of something of a very lucrative partnership between Spotify and Netflix, which speculatively, I believe I think at some point we may see a merger between these two. We're not there yet, but I think this opens it. If this move is successful, you could see a way whereby their partnership, they may think in order to compete with their competitors, the best thing would be to come together rather than to remain separate, because the future of content is quite interesting, especially with the looming threat of artificial intelligence. I think with the strikes, if you were someone who was paying attention to the actors strike when it was happening, one of the biggest fear actors had was of AI replacing them, but also of using AI to use their image and likeness in place of them, whereby, if you need a scene and the actor is not available, through AI, you're able to remake this person. I think that was a big fear, but what people didn't anticipate is what's happening now, where there is the creation of actually a whole different human being who walks, moves, and talks like a human, to whereby you don't need actors anymore. So that is something that those in Hollywood, especially actors and people like that, are afraid of happening, and it's a big threat. So another big threat that people have, and something that we've seen on YouTube, is what happens is when a new technology comes and people adopt it and people try to use it. I think in the beginning, you will end up with a lot of people infringing upon people's rights, people using something, because one thing is you want to use someone's likeness so that you have these quick gains. But I think with time, what's going to happen is how people use AI is going to be so different, to whereby the cost of productions are going to go low, and we're going to have a massive upscale in the amount of content that's being created, which is a big threat to companies like Netflix, like Spotify, because what they have right now as their moat, or what they have right now as their USP, is the ability to say, if you're Netflix, this is a Netflix production, this is something. So it's not, the difference between Netflix and YouTube is content on Netflix is not user generated. It's content that they make, it's content that has been invested, and it's content that costs millions of dollars to produce. That is something that they're able to then use to market to the people, and that separates them from a random YouTube show, because these people have put in money and these are professionals that are doing this work. But with AI, You know what I mean? We're at a time where AI can do that same job, or if not better. So it is a struggle and a challenge that they have to start thinking about. So I think what this deal means, when I'm looking at it, is you're ending up with Netflix having to copy YouTube. And the first way they do this with the combination with Spotify is once you start having this podcast on Netflix, you're almost there. You know, that's user generated content happening on Netflix, but right now it's content generated by Spotify. So it's their top 25 podcasts that they have. I think that will be moving to Netflix. And I think if it succeeds, then why stop there? You know, you could go on and open the doors to other podcasters. But the moment you do that, that then means you're opening the room to content creators, which will be quite fascinating to see how that interprets, because the moment you have different shows, depending on the numbers, you know, shows like Call of Duty and stuff like that, you could see them being put on Netflix for the users' engagement and enjoyment, which essentially makes Netflix some form of YouTube. And I think if you have success in that, why stop there? Now you're going into the space of, what if we just bring some of the user-generated content over to Netflix and see if this works? You know, if you have stuff like what Mr. Beast does, if you could put that on Netflix, would that bring in a new subscriber base, or would that open, you know, the content to? Because right now the assumption that I'm seeing from the headlines, they're assuming that the people that are on Netflix are different from the people who are already consuming this content on Spotify, whereas what I see is just the same person doing the same thing. But the challenge that these people have is a cost, right? So if you're spending, for example, here in Canada, $12 on Netflix, $12 on Spotify, that's $24. And if you don't have to, if you could only spend $12 on one of the platforms, I think that would be preferable for a lot of people. So it'll be interesting to see where this leads, but where I can see, which is something not likely to happen, I could see them coming together and you have this Netflix Spotify thing, which will be interesting if that happens. Imagine you're playing some music, you stop, you play a movie. Guess what? That's YouTube. So that is a possibility of what might happen, and it'll be interesting to watch the space in terms of what happens and will it work. An interesting take as well is Spotify's deal with ChatGPT. I think that is actually quite smart. If someone's talking to GPT and like, hey, GPT, I feel this way, do you have any recommendation? And then GPT basically sends you through just to Spotify, and you listen to their music over there. That's a good integration. I don't know how that deal works in terms of financials, but it'll be an interesting to see way, because I think people are relying on these LLMs. People are relying on these AIs to help them, and it'll be interesting to see how much uptake there is. I, for one, stopped using Spotify for many reasons. It's just not, when you're on, I feel like when you're on an Apple device, anything that's not Apple is just a headache to work with. So that was the main reason. They say this is to open up to different creators. I don't see how it opens up, because it's going to be Spotify created content. The one thing that I think is going to happen, especially with these deals and AI coming, I think the days of having $200 million films, that's going to come to an end real soon. And the challenge that you're going to have is it's going to be about merit and quality, and who's the film for, who's the market. And I think there's a shift that's coming to the filmmaking space. And the more these deals are made, it'll be interesting to see where we end up. So keep an eye on this. I think it's fascinating. It'll be interesting. Like, will they open this to just people who are not associated with Spotify in terms of the production, or if it just sticks to being it's Spotify produced content that they're putting on Netflix? That will also be quite fascinating. Or we will see a point where Netflix just goes, you know what, we don't need Spotify. We will just open the doors to podcasters to come through and do it. Because I think right now the model that Netflix has, whereby in order to get your stuff on Netflix, you need an agent, you need somebody who's affiliated with Netflix, and then you need to pitch it, and then they have some sort of control. That way they separate themselves from YouTube. But I think that if it's just about generating revenue, at some point they will have to open to different creators, because different creators bring an audience, and to service the audience that they have. I have a friend, like I said, who I was speaking to, who's like, yo, I've been scrolling through Netflix and there's nothing to watch. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. If you look at the amount of movies that are there. But I also feel the same sometimes when I'm on Netflix, where I'm like, bro, what the hell? So it'll be interesting to see how this business move works. In other news, Apple has secured an exclusive deal for the US broadcast rights for Formula One. Under the terms, a 5-year pact with F1 parent company Liberty Media, Apple TV will air every F1 race starting in 2026. This is again another interesting move as we keep looking at how these streaming platforms are preparing themselves for the future, especially right now. I think that live sports are going to be premium moving forward more than they were before, mainly because I think with the advancement of AI, a lot of people are going to be interested in making sure that I'm watching something human. I think which is a big threat for scripted content and even non-scripted content like your reality shows. Like I think that there's gonna be a challenge because it'll be hard to distinguish between AI and what's real. And I think there'll be a premium level put on what's real moving forward. And what this deal for these people have is the more of these live events that you have on your platforms, the more people will come in because people will follow fans of that sport will follow the sport and become your subscriber. So for example, with Apple getting F1, all those F1 people, people who had to watch it on a, shady site, they may consider paying $12 to watch their favorite thing. With Formula One, though, like just the way the calendar works is tricky because I know sometimes you're watching and then they go away for 3 weeks and then they come back. So it'll be interesting to see how subscribers move around there. But I think that this is a massive opportunity for Apple. It's a big revenue driver. I would have seen Formula One. I think Netflix should have bid if they could. But I guess Netflix would want to have it for like globally. Because with their drive to survive, it would sort of make sense to have the Formula One on their platform. But I mean, Apple did the Formula One movie. So that works for Apple as well. I think it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward. So this is interesting. It's an interesting space just to look at how these streaming platforms are moving in terms of live broadcast events. That Canelo versus Crawford fight, or looking at what Paramount just did with the UFC with a $7.7 billion deal. The MLB rights, some rights that I feel like are super big for these platforms if they can get is soccer. I think that's major, bro. Like if you can stream football throughout the globe, especially on a platform like Netflix or even Apple, that'll be ridiculous, but the cost of doing that and then the opportunity. So that'll be interesting to see. The F1 deal will diversify Apple Sports offerings. The company already has a long-term pact with MLS for exclusive rights to air games from North America Top Soccer League. However, the future of baseball Apple TV is murky, with reports suggesting that Apple is settled to cut ties with MLB. Somebody who doesn't watch baseball, I don't know much about how big the market they are, but there's crazy amounts of money that's spoken about within MLB. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But yeah, they also have the MLS. I don't really watch that. But I think it's pretty big having live sports on your thing. I think especially just for subscribers, because fans of any sport will follow where their sport goes. I think people are willing to spend money for something that they enjoy compared to movies and stuff like that. Because sometimes with the rhetoric around film and TV, it's just people feel as if it's laziness. Whereas, you get one game every weekend and then you're like, okay, if I'm paying $12 to see 4 games every weekend, I'd rather pay that than for movies where you're like, okay, fine, I've watched it, now I'm done. You know what I mean? So I think that it'll be interesting to see how these things play out and which are the most popular sports and how do you then create, because I think once you have a specific sport on your platform, you can also start creating content around it. You can do documentaries, you can do a lot of stuff that can be worked and people will generally enjoy watching. So if they get Formula One, I don't know if they can make their own version of Drive to Survive, but it'll be interesting. They could even do a follow-up to the Formula One movie, which will be great because now everything is within their ecosystem. So that's something that is impressive. I would say the only thing that I have gripe with these live events that they have is because of how sometimes these different platforms that try to fragment their broadcasting rights. For example, if you look at the NFL or even with football, where it's just like, oh, you have this game over there, you have this over there, you have that over there. That might be complicated for people just to follow through, and it will increase your costs of engaging with whatever the viewings are. So it'll be interesting to see how Apple plays this. But I think this opens their slate and makes it interesting. I think Apple, in terms of streaming, is actually an interesting space to see because they have the money. It's difficult to compete with someone who has the resources, and I think Apple is in a good position right now to be able to make all these deals that they have been making. So it'll be interesting to see what the future is. Just also like with Formula One, I don't really see like because with Formula One, I know that it's a race weekend starts from Friday, so you're most like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think it's like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but it's mostly Friday, Saturday, Sunday, free practice 1, free practice 2, and then you get free practice 3 on Saturday and qualifying, and then you have the actual race on the Sunday, and then you have room to have discussion with different drivers and do all that content. So it'll be interesting to see what Apple does and how Apple moves with these. With that said, for today, yeah, that's the outlook of what's happening within our world of business between Netflix, Apple. It'll be interesting to see in a summary Netflix, Spotify deal. That's something that I would say keep an eye on, especially for the coming years. We may see more of these collaborations happening, and who knows, a major might just okay. It'll be interesting to see what the future of these companies hold, especially Netflix, because right now I feel like in terms of growth wise, it's stagnated and they are pushing heavy on content. So it'll be interesting to see how the market reacts to what Netflix is doing. But I'll keep an eye out on them. And then in terms of Apple, Apple is going Apple, man. Apple got money. We're not really concerned. I for one am very disappointed in Apple TV just because I'm like, bro, like you pay so much money and you run out of their content within the first week. So it's like, yo, what are we doing? But it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for both companies.